Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Today's story is titled, "I'll Ruin Your Sleep." Murmured the millionaire, yet that night she fell in love. The rain whispered against the glass walls of the penthouse, blurring the city lights of New York into streaks of gold and gray. Amelia Harper tightened her coat, her reflection trembling in the window. She had promised herself this would just be a quick meeting, a discussion about a photo campaign she desperately needed to keep her studio from closing. But when the elevator doors slid open, the atmosphere inside the room changed everything. Across the dimly lit suite, Ethan Blackwell stood by the bar, pouring whiskey with the ease of someone who never had to check the price tag. His eyes cool, unreadable, lifted as she entered. "You are late," he said, his tone smooth but sharp enough to slice through the silence. Amelia swallowed. "The subway was delayed," she murmured. He did not respond. Instead, he walked closer, each step echoing against the marble floor until the space between them felt charged with something electric. Then, without warning, he slid a folded document across the table. "Sign this," he said. She blinked. "What is this?" "A contract marriage," he replied, his gaze steady. "You will play my wife for 30 days, attend events, smile when needed. In return, I will pay off your debts, every single one." The words landed like thunder. "You cannot be serious," Amelia whispered. Ethan leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "I am always serious. Especially when I say I do not believe in love, only in leverage." The way he said it, calm, almost detached, sent a strange shiver through her. Amelia glanced down at the contract, the black ink gleaming under the chandelier. The amount he offered was more money than she had ever seen, enough to save her studio and her mother's medical bills combined. Still, her pride fought against the desperation clawing inside her. "You could ask anyone," she said, her voice trembling. "Why me?" Ethan took a slow sip of his drink, eyes never leaving hers. "Because you look like someone who would rather burn than beg, and I need someone who will not fall in love." A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "You make it sound like a punishment." His lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "It is," he said softly, "for both of us." Lightning flickered outside the glass wall, throwing their shadows together for a split second, hers, fragile but defiant, his towering and cold. The silence stretched until Amelia finally picked up the pen. "3 rules," Ethan said, watching her. "You do not ask about my past. You do not touch what is mine. And you never forget this is not love." She met his gaze, fire meeting ice. "Fine. But 1 rule from me," she said quietly. "Do not ruin my sleep." Ethan's expression darkened with amusement. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "That," he whispered, his voice barely a breath, "I cannot promise." The storm outside cracked louder, as if the city itself had felt the shift between them. In that moment, Amelia knew this was no ordinary agreement. This was a deal with the kind of man who could destroy your peace, your plans, and maybe, if you let him, your heart. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the city still carried the scent of it, wet asphalt and cold steel. Amelia Harper stood by the window of her small apartment, watching the early light creep across the skyline. The contract from last night lay on her kitchen table, its edges curled where her trembling fingers had gripped it. She had not slept at all. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard his voice again, calm, deliberate, dangerous. "This is not love," he had said. And yet something in the way he looked at her had felt too personal to be just business. Amelia tied her hair into a messy bun, poured herself a cup of cheap coffee, and stared at the figure written in the agreement. It was enough to pay her mother's hospital bills and keep her photography studio alive for another year. She had spent all night convincing herself that she was strong enough to handle this. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was terrified. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black car pulled up outside her building. A man in a gray suit stepped out and knocked on her door. "Miss Harper," he said, his tone professional but not unkind. "Mr. Blackwell sent me. He asked me to bring you to his residence for fittings and media preparation." She froze for a moment, then grabbed her coat. The ride was silent, the city flashing past in streaks of motion and glass. When they reached the Blackwell estate, a modern mansion overlooking the river, Amelia felt the weight of another world pressing down on her. Everything about the place screamed perfection, from the trimmed hedges to the gleaming marble floors. Inside, she was met by a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a clipboard. "Good morning. I am Mrs. Lang, the household manager," the woman said briskly. "We will begin your transformation immediately. You will be introduced as Mrs. Amelia Blackwell at the charity gala next Friday. Until then, you will live here," Mr. Blackwell insists. Amelia blinked. "Live here?" Mrs. Lang nodded. "Yes. Appearances are everything in this world, dear." Within minutes, stylists, tailors, and makeup artists surrounded her. They measured her, pinned fabrics against her skin, discussed color tones and accessories as if she were a mannequin. Every time she tried to speak, someone else turned her chin or adjusted her posture. By the time they finished, the mirror reflected a stranger, a woman polished, elegant, and calm. She barely recognized herself. Later that evening, Ethan appeared in the doorway. He had changed from the sharp suit of last night into a simple black turtleneck and slacks, but the air of control around him was the same. His eyes swept over her once before he said, "You clean up well." Amelia folded her arms. "You make it sound like I was a mess before." "I do not recall saying that," he replied smoothly. "Dinner is ready. I suggest you eat. Tomorrow we start your lessons in etiquette and media behavior." "Lessons?" she repeated. He smirked faintly. "You may know how to take photographs, but in my world, you must learn how to be one." The dining room was long and intimidating. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above an endless table set for two. Amelia sat at the far end, her posture stiff. She tried to eat, but the silence between them felt heavier than the marble walls. Halfway through the meal, she finally spoke. "You really live like this every day?" Ethan glanced up, his expression unreadable. "Structure is necessary. It keeps people in line." "People," she repeated softly, "or feelings." For the first time he looked almost surprised, then his gaze hardened again. "Feelings complicate what should be simple." "Maybe simplicity is overrated," she murmured. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. After dinner, he walked her to the guest wing, stopping at a large door across from his own. "This will be your room," he said. "Everything you need is inside. Remember, you are not a guest here. You are an arrangement." She met his gaze steadily. "I understand. And for what it is worth, I will keep my side of the deal." He nodded once, turning to leave. But before he stepped away, he looked over his shoulder, his tone quieter, almost human. "Try to get some sleep, Miss Harper. Tomorrow, the real performance begins." When he disappeared down the hall, Amelia closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her heartbeat echoing in the silence. The mansion was vast and beautiful, but she had never felt more trapped. As she lay on the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts drifted to the man down the hall, the man who spoke like he owned the night, the silence, and maybe even her fate. Somewhere beyond the walls, thunder rolled again, distant but familiar. And though she hated to admit it, his words lingered in her mind like a promise she could not forget. "I cannot promise not to ruin your sleep." Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, washing the marble floors in soft gold. Amelia Harper stood in front of the mirror, her reflection poised yet uncertain. She wore a cream dress that Mrs. Lang had selected, elegant but suffocating. The first of Ethan Blackwell's etiquette sessions began promptly at 9. He sat across from her in the grand salon, his posture perfect, his expression unreadable. On the table lay a folder titled Rules of Engagement. He tapped it once. "You will memorize these," he said evenly. "They include how to walk beside me, how to smile without speaking, and how to handle questions from the press." Amelia's lips curved slightly. "You mean how to be invisible in plain sight?" He looked up, a faint shadow of amusement flickering in his eyes. "Exactly. You learn quickly." For the next few hours, he drilled her through greetings, posture, and conversation cues. Every movement felt like a test. When she stumbled, his tone sharpened. When she succeeded, he merely nodded, never praised. By noon, she was exhausted. Ethan closed the folder and rose. "We will continue after lunch. You may rest." But as he turned to leave, she said softly, "Is that how you live, Ethan? Following rules all the time?" He paused at the doorway, his back still to her. "Rules keep the world from falling apart, Miss Harper. Or keep you from feeling anything," she murmured under her breath. He did not reply, but she saw his shoulders tense before he disappeared down the hall. That afternoon, Mrs. Lang escorted her to the ballroom where rehearsals for the gala walk would take place. The staff arranged lights and music while Ethan stood at the far end, watching. "Again," he called, his voice echoing through the high ceiling. Amelia took his arm as instructed, but when the cameras flashed, she tripped on the edge of the carpet. He caught her instantly, one hand firm around her waist. The sudden closeness froze them both. She could smell the faint trace of his cologne, sharp and clean like rain. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable beneath his calm exterior, an emotion he quickly buried. He released her gently. "Focus," he said, but his voice was softer now. That night, dinner felt less formal. Ethan poured her a glass of wine himself instead of letting the butler do it. "To survival," he said dryly, raising his glass. She hesitated before clinking hers against his. "And to insomnia," she replied, making him almost smile. "You still think I intend to ruin your sleep?" he asked. "I think you already have," she answered quietly. The air between them shifted, no longer hostile, but charged with something unspoken. Later, she found herself walking along the balcony outside her room. The city lights shimmered across the river, and the night air was cool. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "You should be resting," he said. "You sound disappointed that I am not," he exhaled softly, almost a laugh. "You have a way of arguing that sounds like agreement." She leaned against the railing, studying him. "You talk like someone who has lost too much to hope again." His gaze met hers, the steel in his eyes flickering. "Hope is expensive. I stopped affording it a long time ago." They stood in silence, the city humming below them. Finally he spoke again, lower this time. "Tomorrow you will meet my board members. They will expect a perfect wife. Remember your role." "Do not worry," she said. "I can act." He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just make sure you remember which parts are pretend." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her heartbeat tangled with the sound of his footsteps fading down the corridor. Alone on the balcony, Amelia realized that the more she learned about Ethan Blackwell, the less she understood where the act ended and the truth began. Somewhere between rehearsed smiles and controlled silences, something real was starting to break through, and it terrified her. As the wind swept her hair across her face, she thought of his warning from the night they met. Maybe he was right. Maybe he really would ruin her sleep, not with fear but with the haunting possibility of something she had not expected to find in a man like him: tenderness. The morning of the gala arrived wrapped in tension and soft rain. The mansion buzzed with preparation, assistants moving through the halls carrying gowns, jewelry boxes, and camera equipment. Amelia Harper sat at her vanity while the stylist added the final touches to her hair. The reflection that stared back at her looked calm, confident, and entirely unlike the woman who had signed a desperate contract just days ago. When Ethan Blackwell appeared at the doorway, he paused for a moment, his gaze unreadable. "You are ready," he said simply. She met his eyes in the mirror. "You make it sound like I am going to war." His lips curved faintly. "In my world, you are." The car ride to the charity gala was silent except for the faint hum of the rain against the windows. Amelia's heart raced as the lights of the Grand Meridian Hotel came into view. Outside, photographers were already gathered, flashes bursting like fireworks. As the door opened, Ethan stepped out first, offering his hand. His grip was steady, reassuring, yet distant. "Remember," he murmured, "smile, but never too wide. They can smell weakness." She nodded and took his arm. The moment they stepped onto the red carpet, the noise hit like a wave, cameras clicking, reporters shouting questions. Ethan answered smoothly, each word calculated, each gesture controlled. When one reporter asked about their marriage, he turned to Amelia and said, "I married her because she makes me forget how to sleep." The crowd laughed, enchanted by his charm, but Amelia froze for a heartbeat. That line, his teasing threat, now delivered as affection before hundreds of flashing lights. Somehow, he made it sound real. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers shimmered like constellations. Music swelled, and servers moved through the crowd carrying trays of champagne. Ethan guided her through conversations with senators, investors, and socialites, his hand always at the small of her back. To everyone watching, they looked effortless, an elegant couple perfectly in sync. But every word, every smile, was an act, carefully choreographed. During a pause between introductions, Amelia slipped away to the edge of the balcony to breathe. Her fingers trembled slightly as she leaned against the railing. Moments later, Ethan joined her. You handled yourself well, he said quietly. Almost too well. She turned to face him. You mean I did not embarrass you? I mean, he replied, stepping closer. You are starting to convince me too. The words caught her off guard. For a second, the noise from the ballroom faded, and it was just the two of them under the soft glow of the city lights. He looked at her differently now, less like an employee, more like something dangerous he could not name. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, his phone vibrated. He checked the screen, his expression hardening instantly. We need to leave, he said, voice clipped. Why? The night just started, she asked. He pocketed the phone. Because it just got complicated. Minutes later, they were in the car, silence heavy between them. When they arrived back at the mansion, Ethan was already on the phone with someone. His tone was sharp, defensive. I told you this was handled. Find out who leaked it. Amelia's stomach dropped. Leaked what? She asked. He hung up and turned to her. For the first time, his composure cracked. Someone has the contract, Amelia. The press will know by morning. The color drained from her face. What are you saying? They will know this marriage is fake? He nodded grimly. Yes, and they will drag your name through the dirt before sunrise. She stepped back, her voice trembling. You promised this would stay private. I did not plan for betrayal, he said coldly. Someone inside leaked it. And you think I did it? Her tone sharpened, wounded. You think I would risk my own humiliation? He hesitated, and the silence between them was answer enough. She let out a small, bitter laugh. I should have known. To you, everything is a transaction. Turning away, she whispered. The difference between us, Ethan, is that I signed the deal but you sold your heart long before it began. Without waiting for his reply, she walked down the hall, her heels echoing against the marble floor. Ethan stood there, watching her disappear into the shadows, his chest tightening in a way he did not understand. For the first time in years, control was slipping from his hands, and he hated how much it hurt. The following morning, the headlines exploded across every screen and newspaper in the city. The millionaire's marriage was just a contract, one read. Fake bride, real scandal, said another. Amelia Harper stood frozen in front of the television in her room, her reflection mirrored beside the words that stripped her dignity bare. Reporters swarmed outside the Blackwell estate gates, shouting her name, accusing, mocking. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages from numbers she did not know. She turned it off and sank onto the edge of the bed, numb. Downstairs, Ethan Blackwell faced his board members, his calm demeanor replaced by a cold, silent fury. We are containing it, his lawyer said. But Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the window where cameras flashed beyond the iron fence. There is no containing this, he said quietly. Someone wanted blood, and now they have it. When he returned to the guest wing, Amelia was waiting by the doorway, her suitcase half-packed. Her face was pale but steady. Do not bother explaining, she said before he could speak. The world already decided what I am. You should not go out there, he said, his voice softer than he intended. They will tear you apart. And whose fault is that? She asked. You created this performance, Ethan. You wrote every line. I just played the part. He stepped forward, guilt flickering behind his eyes. I am trying to fix it. She shook her head. Some things you do not fix, you face them. Then she lifted her suitcase and walked past him. He could have stopped her. He should have. But for the first time, Ethan Blackwell had no words. The house that once felt invincible now echoed with absence. For days, he avoided the press, ignoring calls from investors and colleagues. The company's stock trembled, and whispers of resignation circled like vultures. Yet none of it hurt as much as the quiet in the halls where Amelia's laughter had once filled the air. Meanwhile, Amelia found herself in a small hotel downtown under a false name. The noise of the city outside was relentless, but inside her room, it was painfully still. Her mother's hospital bills still loomed, her savings almost gone. Every dream she had tried to save with that contract now felt like dust in her hands. One evening, as she scrolled through the endless stream of gossip online, she stumbled upon a video clip from the gala. Ethan was on stage, his hand around her waist, saying that she made him forget how to sleep. The crowd had laughed, enchanted. But now she watched it differently. The way his eyes lingered on her had not been rehearsed. It had been real. For the first time, she wondered if the man behind the contracts and rules had been fighting something deeper than pride. Across the city, Ethan sat alone in his office, the skyline burning orange with the setting sun day. In his hand was a photograph Amelia at the gala, mid-laugh, unaware the camera had caught her. He had not meant to fall for her. She was supposed to be a name on a document, a solution to a business problem. But somehow she had become the only thing that felt real. When his assistant entered, Ethan looked up. "Set up a press conference," he said. "Sir, that might make it worse." Ethan shook his head. "No, it is time someone told the truth." The next morning, the world watched as Ethan Blackwell stood at a podium before a sea of flashing lights. He looked exhausted but resolute. "Yes," he said. "Our marriage began as a contract. That much is true. But what happened after was not written in any agreement. It was not planned or bought. It was real." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "I take full responsibility for the deception. Miss Harper did nothing wrong. If anyone should be judged, it is me." The reporters erupted with questions, but he stepped back from the microphones and walked away. Across town, in her hotel room, Amelia watched the broadcast through tears she did not expect. For the first time, she saw the man behind the empire, not the cold, perfect millionaire, but the one who finally risked everything to tell the truth. She closed her eyes and whispered to the empty room, "You finally ruined my sleep, Ethan Blackwell." Outside, the city lights flickered, and the storm that had begun their story started to fade into dawn. 2 weeks passed since Ethan Blackwell's confession shook the media. The story that once burned across every headline slowly began to fade, replaced by new scandals and fresher news. But for Amelia Harper, silence was louder than any headline. She had moved back into her small studio, surrounded by canvases, photographs, and unpaid bills. Every night, she told herself she had done the right thing by walking away. Yet every night her mind replayed the sound of his voice, steady and raw, telling the world she was innocent. One evening, she sat by the window editing photos for a small magazine job when a soft knock came at the door. She opened it to find a young delivery man holding a large package wrapped in brown paper. "From Mr. Blackwell," he said simply. Amelia signed for it, heart-thudding. Inside was a single-framed photograph. It was the picture she had taken during the gala, a candid shot of the ballroom from the balcony, light spilling through the crystal chandeliers. But now, at the bottom of the frame, was an engraved plaque that read, "For the woman who reminded me what is real." Beneath the frame was an envelope containing an invitation embossed with gold. "The Art of Amelia Harper Grand Opening Exhibition, sponsored by the Blackwell Foundation." She stared at it, stunned. The date was tomorrow. The same foundation that had once been synonymous with control and perfection now carried her name on its event flyer. For hours, she paced the room, torn between pride and fear. But when dawn broke, she made her choice. The next evening, the old gallery downtown glowed with warm light and the murmur of guests. It was small compared to Ethan's usual world of skyscrapers and cameras, but it felt alive. Her photographs lined the walls' street corners, people laughing, fleeting moments of truth. As Amelia greeted guests, her hands still trembled slightly, but her smile was genuine. Near the end of the night, a hush swept through the room. The crowd parted, and there he was, Ethan Blackwell, dressed in a dark suit, no entourage, no spotlight, just quiet presence. He approached slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I was not sure you would come," she said softly. "I was not sure you would let me," he replied. For a moment neither spoke. The weight of everything unsaid hung between them. Then Ethan took a small step closer. "I wanted to give you this," he said, handing her a small velvet box. Inside was a simple silver key. "What is this?" she asked. "The studio on Fifth Avenue," he said. "It is yours now. No contracts, no signatures, just something that belongs to you alone." Her throat tightened. "Why are you doing this, Ethan?" His gaze softened, his voice low but clear. "Because you were right. I sold my heart long before we met. But when I lost you, I realized I wanted it back." She blinked, tears forming despite her effort to stay composed. "You think you can just buy forgiveness with a gallery and a key?" He shook his head. "No, I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance to earn your trust without a contract this time." The silence that followed was fragile, but it felt honest. Around them, the gallery lights shimmered, casting soft reflections on the framed memories that surrounded their story. Finally, Amelia placed the key back in his palm and closed his fingers over it. "Keep it," she said quietly. "If I ever choose to come back, it will not be for what you built. It will be for you." Ethan nodded slowly, a faint, hopeful smile tugging at his lips. "Then I will wait," he said. Before she could respond, The lights dimmed slightly as the final guests began to leave. The music faded into the hum of the city outside. When Amelia turned to look at the wall behind her, she noticed one last frame she had not hung herself. It was a photo of her, taken that night at the gala, standing in front of the crowd, unaware that Ethan was looking at her. Beneath it, a small handwritten note read, "For the night I finally stopped sleeping." She looked back at him, her chest tightening. He met her eyes with quiet certainty, and for the first time since their deal began, the space between them felt real, uncalculated, and full of promise. Weeks passed, and the city slowly began to forget the scandal that had once consumed it. But for Amelia Harper and Ethan Blackwell, forgetting was impossible. Something had shifted after that night at the gallery, a quiet understanding that hovered between them, fragile but alive. Amelia returned to her work, focusing on rebuilding her career from the ground up. Her small studio filled again with the scent of paint, paper, and coffee. Clients began to return, drawn by her resilience and honesty. Yet, even as her days grew busy, her nights remained restless. She found herself thinking about Ethan more often than she wanted to admit, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, the look in his eyes when he said he would wait. Across town, Ethan had changed too. His company's board tried to convince him to distance himself from the incident, to restore his reputation with a new PR campaign, but he refused. Instead, he redirected funds from corporate promotions to the Blackwell Foundation, expanding grants for young artists under Amelia's name. His assistant found him one evening sitting in the darkened boardroom, staring at the skyline. "You are losing millions, sir," the assistant said quietly. Ethan's reply was simple. "Then at least I am losing it for something that matters." A month later, fate brought them together again. It was a late afternoon when Amelia walked into the hospital where her mother was recovering. She had just finished delivering a photo project when she saw Ethan standing by the reception desk, holding a bouquet of white lilies. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he smiled faintly. "Your mother told me she missed having flowers in her room," he said. "You did not have to do that," Amelia murmured, though her heart softened. "I know," he said, handing her the bouquet. "But I wanted to." They sat together in the quiet hospital garden afterward, the autumn air cool around them. The silence between them was not uncomfortable this time. It was the kind that came after forgiveness, gentle and unfinished. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady but vulnerable. "You once told me some things cannot be fixed. You were right. But maybe some things can be rebuilt." Amelia met his gaze. "Rebuilding takes two people, Ethan. It is not about contracts or charity. It is about showing up when it matters." He nodded, his expression sincere. "Then let me show up," he said simply. She smiled, the first genuine one he had seen in months. "We will see," she whispered. As the sun dipped lower behind the skyline, she glanced at him and realized something she had not before. He looked tired, yes, but lighter, freer. For the first time since their deal began, Ethan Blackwell did not look like a man running from himself. He looked like a man learning how to begin again, and though neither of them said it out loud, both knew this was not an ending. It was the beginning of something real, something neither of them had expected when they first signed a contract under the storm. Winter came softly that year, painting the city in silver light and quiet evenings. Amelia Harper's life had found a rhythm again, steady and real. Her photographs were gaining recognition, her studio booked months in advance. Yet, despite her success, one presence still lingered in her thoughts: Ethan Blackwell. They had seen each other occasionally at charity events or foundation meetings, always polite, always professional, but every glance between them carried a spark neither dared to name. One evening, an invitation arrived at her studio, embossed with the Blackwell Foundation seal. Inside was a handwritten note. "1 year ago, we made a mistake and called it a deal. Tonight, I would like to correct both. E." Beneath the note was a card. "Charity Gala, the Renaissance Hall, 8 p.m. Amelia stared at it for a long time before deciding to go. When she entered the grand hall that night, the air shimmered with chandeliers and music. Guests in elegant gowns and tuxedos filled the room, but the moment she walked in, Ethan saw her. He was standing near the stage, tall and composed, wearing a dark suit that fit like it was part of him. As she approached, he smiled faintly, that same restrained smile she remembered from the night they first met. "You came," he said. "You invited?" she replied, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. He gestured toward the stage. "I have something to say before the night ends. Stay, please." When he took the microphone, the room quieted. His voice was calm but carried through the hall with unmistakable sincerity. "A year ago, I made a contract to protect what I thought mattered: my reputation, my company, my control. But in doing so, I met someone who showed me what truly does. She taught me that love is not about possession or perfection. It is about courage, about honesty, about showing up." His eyes found hers in the crowd. "Amelia Harper, this night, every exhibit, every donation you see around this room, it is all part of a new foundation. Not mine, ours. It is called the Second Chance Initiative. It exists because of you." A murmur spread through the crowd, but Amelia could not move. Her heart pounded as he continued. "And tonight I have no contracts to offer, no deals to make. Only a question." The lights dimmed slightly as he stepped down from the stage and walked toward her. The entire room seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them beneath the soft glow of chandeliers. When he reached her, he held out a small ring box. "You once said rebuilding takes two people," he said quietly. "So here I am, asking if you will rebuild with me. Not as a deal, not as a performance, but as truth." For a moment, Amelia forgot how to breathe. The man who had once built walls around himself now stood before her, open and unguarded. Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "You already rebuilt me, Ethan." The crowd erupted in gentle applause as she took his hand. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, it was simple, elegant, nothing like the flashy jewels she had seen at his galas before. It felt right real. Ethan smiled, his voice barely above a whisper. "I guess I kept my promise," he said. "I told you I would ruin your sleep." She laughed softly, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You did," she replied, "but in the best possible way." Spring came early the following year, soft and golden, carrying the scent of renewal. The headlines that once defined Ethan Blackwell now spoke of the Blackwell Foundation's new community programs, art scholarships, and restoration projects. But behind every headline was a quiet story of two people who had found their way back to each other. Amelia Harper stood in the courtyard of their new gallery, sunlight catching the glass panels above her. The sign read, "The Art of Second Chances." Inside, a collection of her photographs filled the walls, portraits of people rebuilding their lives, captured with the same tenderness that had once saved her own. Ethan appeared behind her, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking more like a man content than a man in command. "You turned the world into something worth looking at again," he said softly. Amelia smiled. "And you finally learned how to stop controlling every moment," he chuckled, leaning against the doorway. "That might be the hardest lesson of all." The grand opening was simple, intimate, attended by friends, artists, and families from the Foundation's programs. Amelia's mother sat in the front row, healthy and radiant, tears glistening as she watched her daughter speak. "A year ago," Amelia said to the crowd, her voice steady, "this gallery began as a promise, not just between two people, but between hope and heartbreak. Every piece here is a reminder that it is never too late to begin again." As the applause filled the room, Ethan reached for her hand. When the lights dimmed and the guests mingled, he guided her toward the rooftop garden that overlooked the river. The city stretched before them, glowing under the evening sky. "Do you ever think about that first night?" he asked quietly. She laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The night you offered me a contract and called it a marriage? How could I forget? And how you told me not to ruin your sleep," he added with a small grin. "You failed spectacularly," she teased. He smiled, but his tone softened. "You know, Amelia, I spent so many years trying to buy time, control it, twist it to my will. But with you, I learned something different. Love is not about owning moments. It is about living them." She turned to face him, her eyes shining in the golden light. "Then let us live all of them," she said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key, the same one he had once tried to give her. "Our studio on Fifth Avenue is ready," he said. "This time it is not a gift, it is where we start together." She placed her hand over his, smiling through quiet tears. "Then let us start now," she whispered. As the night deepened, laughter rose from the courtyard below, blending with the sound of the river. The world that had once felt cold and distant now felt full of color, promise, and peace. Amelia leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "You did ruin my sleep," she said softly, "but you gave me every dream worth staying awake for." He kissed her forehead gently, his voice a murmur against the night. "And that," he said, "is the only deal I will ever make again." The camera of the world faded on their silhouettes against the skyline, not as a billionaire and a photographer, but as two souls who had turned a mistake into a masterpiece.